So I just want to already we're going to have some very brave women who are going to be sharing little parts of their story. I appreciate what Chris has to say. Again, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have seen it turn against the women so many times, and it has been so frustrating for me. But I have one lady now who's going to come and is going to tell a little bit of her story. I want you guys just to really appreciate these women, knowing how much courage it takes to come up and to break the silence and to tell what's happened. But that's part of the healing process for me. It has been healing. So I'm going to introduce you right now to my dear friend Nicole, who's got a story to tell. Come on.
Thank you, Joy, for making me get up here and do this. Makes me love you more. I'm Nicole. I've known Joy for a long time, but we sort of lost touch after knowing each other many, many years ago. And she pursued me, hunted me down, contacted me, and said, I want you to be a part of Called to Peace. I want to talk to you about your story. And through this ministry, God has just given me such a cool opportunity to be able to share my story with other women. I was in an abusive relationship for 20 years. We got together when I was 15 and he was 19. It started with sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and progressed throughout our marriage once we got married when I was 20. After we'd been married for about 4 years, we moved here with his job. I'd had 2 children by then. And when we got here, things started to intensify. Now, at the time, I did not know I was in an abusive relationship. I didn't know I had been sexually abused. I didn't know I'd been emotionally abused. To me, in my mind, abuse was being hit, punched. That's all I knew. I didn't know there was anything else out there. And being here away from family, I began to feel crazy, like I was going crazy, and I couldn't figure out why. Later, as I look back, I realized I lost my support system. We moved here, I didn't have friends, I didn't have family, so my go-to was always my mom when something wasn't right, when I didn't feel right. Without that here, things started escalating very, very quickly. He began to get more verbally abusive. He was very manipulative. I learned the word gaslighting. Now I know what he was doing. So I started to feel as if I was going crazy. I doubted myself. He was really good at making me feel bad about myself. So I had very low self-esteem. I stayed at home the majority of the time. We have 5 children together. And he was a traveling salesman. So whenever he was gone, life was beautiful. There was peace in my home. It's not that I felt all confident, but I felt better. I wasn't crying all the time. And then he would come back home, and it was like a black cloud just planted itself over our house. And it was just evil. And it took a long time for me to realize there's something going on. Something isn't right. I like to call it the moment that God flipped the switch in my heart. It was after my 5th child was born. My little boys had come downstairs. They were 10 and 8 at the time. And they asked their daddy, "Can we play with you?" And he exploded on them. And it was like God just flipped the switch. And the blinders were taken off, and I was like, oh, heck no. You've done this to me all these years. You are not doing this to my kids. And the 2 of us had a huge blowing up, and I was like, I'm finished, I'm done. However, I grew up in the Baptist church, and divorce was not an option, and so I had to figure this out. And I agreed to go to counseling. And so we went to counseling where, in our church, which was hard the second I walked in because it was a man. And I went in just already afraid because I wasn't at a place where I felt comfortable speaking to another man. But immediately we were thrown you made a covenant before God. You're in this commitment. This is your cross to bear, and I'm going to teach you how to figure it out. So I was told in that moment that I needed to read my Bible more, that I needed to be more submissive, that I needed to have more sex with my husband, and that I needed to pray for God to reveal the sin in my life that was causing his behavior. And I left that day in tears, dumbfounded, thinking, I had caused it all. I said I was going to cry. That I had caused all that pain on my kids, that it was my fault, I had done something wrong. But I went home, and he was my pastor, and I believed him, and it was me, and that's what I did. I went home, and I put all those things into practice, but I watched things continue to fall apart as he became more aggressive. He was not physically abusive. That was not until the end, when I finally made it clear, you have no more control. I am, like, this is it. We're getting a divorce. And that's when he became physical with me. But I was put under church discipline. They had told me to allow him back in the home. And when I refused, they put me on church discipline. But at the end of the day, God is a very, very big God. I was told that if I divorced, I would no longer be in God's favor, that I was even threatened with, you will go to hell. You'll spend eternity in hell for getting a divorce, especially if I remarried. And I'm a big people pleaser, and I struggle with that. A great counselor once gave me a book. It's When People Are Big and God is Small, and it has made a huge difference in my life. Yeah, it's a good book. But I also wanted to be where God wanted me. And so that was really hard for me to be told, you'll be out of God's favor if you leave this man. However, God never stopped pursuing me, and he never left my side, and he has opened doors left and right for me to share who he is, and that there is hope, and that he doesn't expect us to live in this and to live this way. So because of God's pursuit, because of God's love, I can stand here and say I'm a survivor who's here to share with others the hope that's found in Jesus.
There was a couple of things I wanted to say, just kind of to piggyback on some of the things that Chris was saying. I've been doing this for an awful long time now. That one's yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want your germs. And so a lot of words of caution. I've been doing this a long time, and I've helped a lot of women just get out. Because if you don't have somebody who really understands the dynamics of domestic violence, you can end up making the situation a whole lot worse instead of helping. It's going to take strict accountability. I've seen one case, I've been doing this for 20 years, right? I've seen one case where we successfully reconciled them, but there was some strict accountability in place. And there was no victim blaming going on. So you were talking about, you really need to know what you're doing. This is just like, we're not going to go out. And I don't have any guilt anymore. In the beginning, I was feeling guilty because I was saying, you just need to get out. But there were no resources. So if there's no resources, then it's better to be non-oppressed and to be safe. So safety is always your number one priority. I do have some wonderful survivors who've shared their story, and I've got a lady who is in it at this point, and she is promised to share her story, but she's not going to stand up here. So I'm going to read her story. My dear friend Joy asked me to write my experience with domestic abuse and my attempts to get help. When I said yes, I had no idea how difficult it would be to put on paper the days, the weeks, and years of disappointment. I told her I would have this written and back to her in 2 days. Well, now it's been 2 weeks, and it's been very difficult to compose because my own experience it seemed that my pleas for help have only brought support to my abuser rather than to me. Several years ago, I went to the head pastor of my church to seek help. It took extreme courage to make that appointment, to go to that appointment, and to talk about how my marriage really was behind closed doors. Sadly, my pastor's response was beyond humiliating. He twisted his head back in disapproval, leaned back in his chair, and with his body language told me he doubted my story. After I had struggled to use the words abusive, phony, and malicious, there was a smirk and a slight laugh that immediately made me realize that my courage to speak the truth had been in vain. Then I heard the words, You don't have an abuse issue. You have a communication problem in your marriage." And I couldn't hold back the tears. Just to give you a little bit of background, my husband and I have been married for 15 years. Things seemed okay in the beginning when we were living near my family over 2,000 miles away. But when we relocated, things began to change. No matter what I did to make him happy, he was never pleased with me. He called me fat, stupid, and incompetent. He still does. We have 3 children. My middle son, trembles in fear whenever he walks into a room. He will not allow me to go home and visit my family and doesn't like for me to even call them. He doesn't really hit me, but I'm a prisoner in my house. You see, he works from home and he monitors every conversation I have. He even has spyware on my computer and a tracking device on my phone so that when I do go out, he knows my every move. He criticizes nearly every step I take, and he often berates me in front of the children using names like B, the bad, like he curses me, calls me a whore in front of my children. Sometimes he shoves me. Sometimes he blocks me in a room or blocks my car into the garage so I can't leave the house. The head pastor and his wife were close friends of ours before I opened up about our marital problems. We had shared meals together. We'd often had kids' birthday parties and even vacations together. But after my meeting with my pastor, it seemed that my friendship with them was brushed aside, but their relationship with my husband continued to flourish. I was ignored, snubbed, avoided. I was told I couldn't serve anymore within the church, but my husband has been allowed to continue. He has been allowed to continue to serve as a deacon and in many other capacities. I was told that I needed to be mentored and counseled on how to be a better and more spiritual wife, but my husband is still honored as a leader in the church. In fact, I feel like the honor that he receives in the church is damaging my oldest child's faith. She recently vowed she would never step back in the church again and left heartbroken after the pastor praised her dad from the pulpit. She can't understand how they can be so blind or how they can promote such lies. I've always felt it was an uphill battle trying to get help from my church. Time and time again in counseling with my spouse sitting beside me, I felt humiliated and unbelieved as I heard the words, "You would be in a much better marriage state if you would just joyfully be more submissive to your husband." You guys, this really happens. I've seen it so many times. Once I exposed how our marriage was, my spouse no longer allowed me any access to our personal finances. I was given a strict allowance that doesn't even begin to cover the basic needs of our family, groceries, medical bills, and other necessities. But he refuses to let me work outside the home. He makes over 6 figures a year and buys whatever he wants for himself, while the kids and I go without. When I tried to tell the church about our struggle, they told me my husband is the head of the household and it's his decision to control all the finances is his decision. And that I really need to be careful what I tell people so I don't damage his reputation. I tried to honor my husband, and I've tried to follow the counsel of my church, but things only seem to get worse. I am so concerned about my children. They're full of anger and fear, and I worry that their view of God is being distorted because the people who represent him seem to be promoting their dad's malicious behavior. I have so many questions that I don't know how to answer because honestly, I still have the same questions they do. But I've learned that asking them doesn't do any good. And in fact, in my case, it seems like it's done more harm than good. Signed, Mom of 3, who is praying that God will allow me to get out soon.